In Chapter 8, we're going to discuss personal finances. We're going to skip sections 8.1 through 8.4, that stuff that you should be familiar with, such as taxes and stuff like that. We're going to move on to 8.5 through 8.8, where we'll talk about ways to save money, and then we'll move on to things like car loans and mortgages and credit cards. So maybe things that you might not be as familiar with. In 8.5, our focus is on saving. So we're going to talk about annuities, different methods of saving, and different types of investments that are common. When we talk about an annuity, that's just a savings where you're putting in equal payments made at equal times. For example, let's say that you're saving for your retirement and you deposit $2,000 in an individual retirement account, so an IRA, at the end of each year until you retire. So the equal payments are $2,000 per year. The equal times would be each year. To determine the amount that you have in your annuity or your savings, you would use this annuity formula. So we're first going to look at an annuity where you're just figuring out the interest, which would be the amount of times you compound it. So interest compounded once a year means your interest will be computed once a year or annually. So in this case, the formula is this A equal to P times 1 plus R to the T power minus 1 over R. So what are all those variables? P is the deposit that you make at the end of each year, so the money that you put in every year. R is your yearly interest rate. T is the amount of years that you're going to have the money in your account. And A is going to be the value of your annuity after the T years. Example 1, Sam is 35 years old. He wants to save for his retirement by depositing $1,200 into an IRA at the end of each year for 30 years. Suppose the interest rate is 10% annually. Part A, how much will Sam have from the IRA after 30 years? So I want to caution you that when you put these values in your calculator, it's okay to round as you go along, but just make sure you don't round it too much. So let's say that you were going to do the parentheses first and then the brackets. Make sure that you're writing down everything that shows up on your calculator. If it's taking it out to 7 decimal places, write all 7 down. The reason being is if you round too much as you go along, then your final answer will be quite different from the one in my lab. And you'll have to do it all over again if you wanted to get the points for it. Part A is saying how much will Sam have after 30 years? So that's your A value. We're just going to plug our values into our formula. Let's see where all the information is coming from. So the $1,200 is how much Sam is putting in every year. So that's your P. 30 years, that would be your T in the formula. The 10% annually, that's the rate. And when we put a rate in a formula, we switch it to the decimal. So this would be 0.1. I think I have everything. I'm just going to put this in. 1,200 times parentheses 1 plus the rate of 0.1. T is 30 to the 30th power minus 1. We're going to close the bracket, divide all of this by the rate of 0.1. So again, you're free to figure out the values as you go along. So you could do the 1 plus 0.1 to the 30th power first, but the caution is don't round that number too much. Write down whatever's on your calculator screen. I prefer just to do it in one keystroke in my calculator because I'm very familiar with using my calculator. But there is, if you want to simplify it a little bit, if you notice in the parentheses 1 plus 0.1, that's easy. That's 1.1. So you can do some small simplifications. Just be careful that you're following order of operations. Oop, forgot a 0 here. And if you don't follow the order of operations, then your answer will probably be way off. When I put this in my calculator, I got 197392.8272. The problem didn't tell me to round it to 1 decimal place or 2 decimal place or anything. And I see that all the values were given to me in nice whole numbers. So I'm just going to round this to 197,393. I'm going to round it to the nearest whole number because that's how the information was given to me. And then it would be approximately $197,393. That was part A. Part B, we want to find the interest that was earned. Okay, so here, $1,200 was deposited every year for 30 years. So if you take the 1,200 times 30, you get 36,000. That's how much money that Sam put in. But he actually got back the 197,393. So if you take how much money he got and you subtract how much money he put in, the difference between those two would be the interest that he earned. So the interest that he earned is 161,393. Oftentimes, annuities are not compounded yearly. Maybe they're compounded monthly or twice a year or quarterly, which is 4 times a year, and so on. Which brings us to this general annuity formula. So this would be if the interest is compounded n times per year. So n is the amount of times that the interest is computed per year. So the variables are all basically the same. P is going to be the amount of money you put in. R is your interest rate. N is the times per year the interest is compounded. T is the total amount of years you're investing. And A is the value of your annuity after T years. The formula is a little bit more complicated. Notice that there's a lot of N's in there. And you could just use this formula if you were figuring out interest one time per year, because notice that in this case, n would be 1, and we're back to the original formula we used in the previous example. In example 2, Deja is 35 years old. She wants to save for her retirement by depositing $100 into an IRA at the end of each month for 30 years. Suppose the interest rate is 10% monthly. How much will Deja have from her IRA after 30 years? Well, here our T is 30. P is the $100 per month, and R is the 10%, so R is 0.1. And since it's compounded monthly, that also tells me that N is equal to 12. Now this is similar to the previous example. T is still 30 years, similar to the previous example. The interest rate is the same. The amount that Deja is putting in is $100 per month. So at the end of 12 months, at the end of a year, she's putting in $1,200. So she's depositing the same amount of money as Sam did in our previous example. So let's see what happens if the interest is compounded monthly instead of yearly. Will that make a difference in the amount of money that you earn in your annuity? Part A, we're just going to plug our values into our formula. Here P is 100 times 1 plus, this is R over N, and R is 0.1, N is 12, T is 30, so the exponent is N times T, which would be 12 times 30. We're going to subtract 1. This can get a little bit messy. You might want to clean it up a little bit. And then divide by the rate over n, which was 12. Now, I put this in my calculator, and I'm going to go ahead and just round it to the nearest dollar. I got 226049. So notice that Deja has the same amount of years, the same interest rate, and her yearly p-value that she's putting in is the same as Sam's from example 1, but notice that she earned a lot more money from her annuity when the interest was compounded monthly. Whenever you invest, the more often interest is compounded, the better off you are. However, it switches if you're borrowing money. If you're borrowing money, you don't want the interest to be compounded a lot because then you're going to owe more money. In part B, we want to find the interest earned. So she's depositing $100 every month, so times 12, for 30 years, so times 30, which gives us $36,000, same as a previous example. She earned 226049 from the annuity. Subtract how much money she put in, and the difference is the interest. I have 190049. So now let's look at a different type of problem with annuities. In the previous examples, we had a set amount of money that we're putting in at a set amount of time, set interest rate, and we're trying to figure out how much we got back. Well, this is a little bit different. Let's say you have a goal of how much money you need, and you want to figure out how much money you have to put in. You want to figure out that p-value. So what this formula gives us is your payments, the p-value, if you have a certain goal or a certain a value that you want. So this formula just comes from the previous formula. We just solved that formula for p. All the values are the same. P is the money that you're going to put in, N times per year to reach your goal. R is still the interest rate. N is times per year. The interest is compounded. T is years. A is the value of the annuity after T years. So all the same values. We're just trying to figure out how much money we need to put in to get our goal amount. Example 3, Chloe wants to save up for a 15-day trip on the Trans-Siberian Railway. She would like to book passage on the Golden Eagle, a high-end private train, and needs at least $20,000 for her trip. She plans on traveling in 5 years and will be depositing money in an annuity that pays 6% compound interest. Part A, how much should Chloe deposit at the end of each month? So here, since she's depositing money monthly, we can assume that N is 12. Let's see, she's traveling in 5 years, so she needs that money at the end of 5 years. So the T would be 5. She needs at least $20,000 for her trip. So this 20,000, that's the amount, the A value that she wants. So I think I have all the values. Interest rate. So 6%, R is equal to 0.06, right? So you just have to be careful. Part A, So the amount P that she should put into this account, this annuity, at the end of each month is going to be her A value, which was 20,000, and then times R over N. So R is 0.06 over N. So the bottom's going to be really kind of hideous. In parentheses, I have 1 plus R over N raised to the N plus T, or N times T. So N was 12 times T was 5 years. Subtract 1. All right, so I am just going to plug this whole thing in my calculator. Again, you can do it in pieces. You just got to be real careful that you don't round a whole lot. Once I put in, I got $287. So if Chloe puts in $287 per month by the end of 5 years, she'll have enough money for her trip. Part B. How much of the $20,000 comes from deposits and how much from interest? Okay, well, the deposits, that would be the amount of money that she's putting in. And since she's putting in $287 per month, there's 12 months in a year, and she's investing for 5 years, it would be 287 times 12 times 5, which gives us 17220. If again, I'm rounding. So this would be deposit. And then the interest that she gets from this investment is going to be the amount she gets, which is the 20,000. Subtract from the amount that she put in, her deposit, 17220, and that will equal 2,780. That would be the interest that she earned. Now let's talk about different types of investments. Some investments have a lot of risk and some not so much. So when we talk about risk and the amount of money that you could possibly earn from your investment, that's what we call the risk and return. Some investments are very safe. So example, if you save money at a bank, there's little or no risk because banks are insured. However, the interest is usually really low, so your return is typically low. It is a safe investment though. So something a little bit riskier would be stocks. Let's look at some vocabulary. So if you purchase stock in a company, you're purchasing shares in the company. That means you have a share in the ownership of the company. And the amount of shares that you have determines the percent of ownership in the company. So for example, let's say a company has a total of 500,000 shares and you own 5,000 of those shares. Then you own 5,000 divided by 500,000, which is 0.01 or 1% of the company. So investors who own some percentage in a company are called shareholders. Buying and selling stocks is called trading. Stocks are traded on the stock exchange. So in the United States, the New York Stock Exchange is our big stock exchange that's on Wall Street. Price of stock is determined by supply and demand. So if a stock is not so much needed, then the price drops. Right now, because of COVID, companies like Amazon did very well because people were ordering things online, so their stock went up. So it was a case of demand, which brought the price of the stock up. So there's two ways that you can make money when you buy stocks. First one would be capital gains, and that's if you sell your shares for more money than you paid for them. and then you would get capital gains. However, you got to be careful. Stocks are risky. It could happen that a company goes bankrupt, you lose your investment, or you end up having to sell your stock for a lower price than what you paid for them. In that case, you have a capital loss. The other way that you can make money from stocks is by dividends. So some companies take their profit, their yearly profit, and they'll distribute all or a portion of the profit to the shareholders. Some companies do not. Some companies take their profits and they reinvest it in their company. So if you are going to buy stock and you're interested in a company that pays dividends, then you need to do a little bit of research. Another investment would be bonds. That's also a higher risk. A bond is traded like stocks are, except for a bond is sort of a loan that you give a company and then they pay you back with interest. So people who buy bonds are lending money to a company. After the agreed upon term that you lend the money for or the length of your bond, then your company will pay you back the face value, the price of purchase, plus interest. So they're traded like stock. An example of bonds that you should be familiar with is the treasury bonds. So those are 30-year bonds. They have a fixed interest rate of 7%. And those bonds are used to help cover our federal deficits. Oftentimes, if you have money to invest, but you don't want to do the research and buy it on your own, you'll invest in a mutual fund. So a mutual fund is just a group of stocks and or bonds, but it's managed by a professional investor. So that would be your fund manager. Examples would be like Schwab. So you take your investment dollars, combine it with the money from other investors, and the fund manager handles the investment for you, buys different stocks, different bonds, and so on. So there's a lot of fund managers out there, which means that every year the fund managers are rated. So 1 would be the worst, 5 is the best. 2 numbers are given. So the first number that's given is going to compare the performance of the mutual fund with a large number of similar funds. The second number is going to compare the performance of the mutual fund with funds that are nearly identical to yours. A score of 5, 5 is best, and 1, 1 is the worst. So a listing of all investments that a person holds is their financial portfolio. And then most financial advisors recommend a diversified portfolio with a mixture of low risk and high risk investments. So now, if we're going to buy stocks, it can be a little bit confusing when you look at a table on the stock market. So let's go ahead and discuss reading of stock tables. Up above, you see in this table a typical stock table. Let's discuss the columns. So when we look at the 52-week high, the 99.46, that would be the highest price traded in the past 52 weeks, so the past year. So this particular stock, and I'm going to kind of jump around, is FedEx. And it was actually a few years ago. So the 52-week high, or the highest of the stock traded for in the past year, was $99.46. So the 52-week low is the lowest price traded in the past 52 weeks. So the past year, the lowest price that FedEx traded for was the $34.02. So the stock is the company name. SYM, that's the symbol for the company. So that's the stock market symbol. FedEx is FDX. This column div, that's for the dividends paid per share in the past year. In this particular example, it's 0.44. So 44 cents was paid per share to the investors. The percent yield, so YLD percent, that's the percent yield. For FedEx, it's 1%. That just means that your investment paid 1% interest or 1% yield. That would be the annual dividends paid to the investors. Kind of think about this, about the interest rate in a savings account. It's usually higher than 1%, so depends on if it's worth it. PE, I'm going to discuss in a little bit. We kind of need to discuss other stuff first. So when you see vol hundreds, that means the volume or the number of shares traded yesterday in hundreds. So FedEx had 37701. If I wanted to figure out how much exact shares were traded, I would times it by 100 to get 3770100. So over 3,770,000 shares were traded yesterday. So going back to our table, this column that says high, that would be the highest price that the stock traded yesterday, so the day before. So FedEx traded, highest that it traded the day before was $45, and then the lowest that it traded for was $43.47. So that would be the price yesterday. Close, that would be the price that the stock traded at yesterday when the stock market closed. So FedEx closed at $44.08. The net change is the change in price from the market close 2 days ago to the close yesterday. So if it's a negative, and this is a negative $1.60, that means that the stock is declining. So at closing, it's closing for less money. So if you add $1.60 to the 44.08, you'll get the price that the stock closed for 2 days ago. Now let's look at PE. FedEx is 19. So PE is just a ratio where they compare the price of the stock to your earnings. To figure out PE, but it's given to you in the table, it would be your yesterday's closing price per share divided by the annual earnings per share. Only on that table, it doesn't say what the annual earnings per share are. We have the closing price, that would be the $44.08. We have that the PE is 19. We just have to figure out the annual earnings per share. So we're going to take that PE formula and we're going to solve it for the annual earnings per share. So that would be yesterday's closing divided by the PE. And we have those numbers. So that would be yesterday's closing, which was $44.08, divided by PE was 19. If I put this in my calculator, I get, and this is a dollar amount, it's $2.32. Let's go back to this table. The annual earnings per share is not the same as the dividends because remember, a company can pay all of the profits out or just part of the profits out. So notice that per share, the annual earning was $2.32. However, the dividends paid was only 44 cents per share. So that tells me that FedEx pays out a portion of their profits, but not all their profits. Let's look at the stock table for Chevron. Chevron is actually a pretty good stock if you want dividends because they typically will pay out a higher percent than other companies. In this particular table, we have, and it traded for a lot more than FedEx. Well, instead of going through the values in the table, let's see if we can just answer the questions for example 4. So we're going to use the table for Chevron stock to answer the following questions. What were the high and low prices for the past 52 weeks? So that would be these first two entries in our table. The high was $127. The low was $51.60. So high, I did it again. And it's a dollar amount, so $127. And the low, $51.60. That's a big difference. So part B, let's say you owned 1,000 shares of Chevron stock. What dividend did you receive last year? So you own 1,000 shares. If you look at the dividend column, it said that they paid $2.05 per share. So since the dividend is $2.05 per share and you own 1,000, you simply take the amount of shares you own, you multiply it by the $2.05, and it looks like it's $2,050. So that's how much you earn from Chevron stock in the prior from the prior year. So what is the annual return for dividends alone? How does this compare to a bank account offering 2.5% interest? The annual return for dividends is your yield, which is 5.8. Now that's a percent. So the annual return is 5.8%. That's very high, actually. How does that compare to 2.5%? Well, the higher the yield percent, the better the investment, the more money you make. So I'm just going to write much higher, which is good. How many shares of Chevron were traded yesterday? So I did want to make a note that in this particular textbook, the stock table is volumes per 100. That's not always the case if you go online and you look at a stock table. Sometimes the volume is just a volume. It doesn't say per 100 or hundreds. And in that case, what the number that you see is the actual number of shares that were traded the day before. But in this case, since it's per 100, we have to take the 55998 and multiply it by 100. To give us 5599800. So what is this? 1, 2, 3. 5,599,800 shares were traded the day before. What were the high and low prices for Chevron shares yesterday? Again, going back to the table, that would be the high-low columns. So the high price would be 89.11, the low would be 88.41. So when I look at this, the highest that it traded for the day before was about $89 and the lowest was about $88. It didn't change that much the day before. Part F says, what was the price at which Chevron shares last traded when the market closed yesterday? In the table, that would be the column that says close. So that would be the 88.34. So $88.34. What does the number in the net change column mean? So in our table, the net change column is a plus 1.15, which is good. So that was a plus. It's a dollar amount. It's 1.15. So it went up $1.15 per share from the closing 2 days ago to the closing yesterday. So you could say something like yesterday's closing was up $1.15 from closing 2 days ago. Okay, compute the annual earnings per share. So the annual earnings per share is closing over PE. So that would be closing over PE. Closed at $88.34. The PE for Chevron is 40. Let me go back up. PE is 43. Oops. So I'm going to round this to 2 decimal places to a dollar amount. And I get $2.05 if I round. Very interesting. Although this is not part of the question, remember the annual earnings are not necessarily the same as the dividends because the dividends paid could be a portion of the profit. Now the annual earnings here, so it's the earnings per share that the company made, not necessarily what was paid out, was $2.05. If you go back to the table and you look at dividends, that's also $2.05. So what that tells me is Chevron paid out 100% of their profits to their shareholders, which is awesome. So the last thing we want to go over is just retirement savings. So there's 3 types of popular retirement savings. The first one that we kind of touched upon earlier was the individual retirement account or the IRA. So this is a saving plan, allows you to set aside money. You can withdraw your money at 59 and a half years old. However, taxes are going to be paid when the IRA is withdrawn. So you pay taxes when you collect your money. Now, a Roth IRA is still a retirement fund. You can withdraw the money at 59 and a half years old as well, but you do not pay taxes on the money that you withdraw because you pay the taxes on the money you deposit. So you pay the taxes first, so you don't have to pay the taxes later. Typically, the Roth IRA is better than the individual IRA because when you pay the taxes in the beginning, it's usually less money that you pay than if you're taxed at the end. Another common IRA or retirement fund would be the employer-sponsored retirement plan. So that would be like your 401k, 403b, and so on. So usually the employer and the employees both contribute money to those retirement plans. Our last example, example 5 from this section, would be looking at an IRA. So let's say that between the ages of 25 and 35, you contribute $3,000 per year to a 401k. And your employer matches this contribution dollar for dollar. The interest rate is 8% compounded annually, so it's yearly. What is the value of the 401k at the end of the 10 years? So first of all, what is P? You're contributing $3,000 per year. So that would be your P. And here, since it's per year, N is equal to 1. So that's yearly. That would be the more simple formula that we first started out with. Except for, you have to be careful with our P value because your employer matches your contribution dollar for dollar. So if you're putting in $3,000 They're putting in $3,000. So your contribution plus their contribution. So your p-value is actually $6,000 that you're depositing in your annuity or your IRA yearly. Now we have the rate that's 8%, so R is going to be 0.08. And then since we know it's compounded annually or yearly, we know that our N is 1, which we have already discussed. Is there anything else that we're missing? We have P, we have N, we have R. What about T? How long are we investing this money for? You're investing it from the ages of 25 to 35. So that means T is going to be 10 years. Now I have everything. The formula I'm using is the first formula that we had for compounded yearly annuity. We're putting in $6,000 per year. It's 1 plus the rate of 0.08. The exponent is the amount of years investing, which would be 10 years, minus 1. All of this is going to be over R. I'm going to round this to the nearest whole number. And when I put this in my calculator, I got 86919. Okay, so after 10 years, we should have $86,919 in our 401k. That's it for this section. And then in the next section, we're going to be looking at car financing.